A 300-page development proposal. 6 months of legal filings. 1 block of storefronts approved for demolition, and not one person had checked who bought the building on the corner. The man inside wasn't on any corporate record. He worked maintenance at an office tower 2 blocks north, before dawn, gone before anyone arrived. She thought she left him with nothing. He had spent his last dollars on a condemned restaurant and the dented spatula he'd carried from his old life. When Lena Crane walked the property at 7 in the morning, the windows had been cleaned from the inside. By the time the board convened, there was a child's floor plan taped to the wall and a legal pad of numbers on the counter. What a firm had spent 6 months trying to erase one man had already begun to feed. The elevator at Pearson Tower opened at 5:47 in the morning onto a hallway that smelled like recirculated air and industrial carpet cleaner. Calvin Reeves stepped out with a toolbox in his left hand and a work order in his right. The fluorescent panel above Suite 1402 had been flickering since Thursday. The maintenance log noted that 2 previous technicians had replaced the bulb. The problem was the ballast, something Calvin had known from the original work order description, before he drove over, before he parked, before he rode 14 floors watching his own reflection in polished steel. He'd known the way you know things, when you've spent enough years paying attention to what other people skip. He replaced the ballast in 22 minutes, tested the panel twice, wrote the correct part number in the log with a ballpoint pen, not pencil, never pencil, because pencil could be changed later, and moved to the next item on the sheet. By 6:15, the hallway was lit and empty, the same as when he arrived. No one saw him come in. No one saw him leave. He had long since stopped needing anyone to. He picked up June at 3:30 from the same corner, same blue backpack with the broken zipper pull she had fixed herself with a paperclip and a rubber band. She climbed in, talking something about a substitute teacher, a science project, and what she described as a deeply unreasonable amount of glitter involved in an incident that school administration had categorized as an accident. Calvin drove and listened and said, "That sounds about right," at the correct intervals, which was always what he said, which June had long ago accepted as his version of active engagement. At the light on Morrison, he checked the rearview mirror. She was looking out the window with the expression she wore when she was working something out. The focused, private look of someone running calculations she wasn't ready to share. He didn't ask. She would tell him when she was ready. He made dinner from what was in the refrigerator: chicken thighs, green beans, the half onion wrapped in plastic that had been there since Tuesday. He moved through the kitchen with the economy of someone trained in a professional kitchen who had never fully stopped thinking like one. June sat at the counter with her homework spread in front of her, occasionally offering opinions on the green beans that Calvin acknowledged without adjusting his method. The chicken came out right. It always came out right. That was one thing that had stayed. After June went to sleep, he washed the dishes, dried them, wiped down the counters and the stovetop and the refrigerator handle. Then he opened the drawer beside the stove, the one with the rubber bands and the expired grocery coupons and the paperclip chain June had assembled in February, and took out the stack of yellow legal paper. He used to do this every Sunday morning. 6 years of marriage, every Sunday without exception. Calvin at the kitchen table with a yellow pad, writing out the week's menus, every meal, every day, with small asterisks beside anything June might refuse. His ex-wife had told him early in the marriage that he never planned anything. He had started writing the menus that same week and had not stopped until the week she left. He was still not entirely sure which failure she had meant when she said it. He took a sheet from the top of the stack, set it on the counter, clicked the pen 3 times the habit of it, the physical memory of the gesture, looked at the blank yellow surface in the kitchen light. Then he folded it along the long edge and put it back. Closed the drawer. He opened the refrigerator instead. Eggs, half a gallon of milk, the end of a block of cheese. He would work it out in the morning the way he always did now. The spatula hung on the hook beside the stove aluminum, slightly warped on one side, with a gouge in the handle from the time it had fallen onto the wrong burner. He had bought it at an equipment liquidation auction in the fall of 2016, $3, on an afternoon when he still believed he would have his own kitchen before he turned 30. He used it every morning for June's eggs. It did the job. That had always been enough. He turned off the kitchen light. 3 miles east. The restaurant at 14 Grover Street sat with its new windows clean and its walls half-primed waiting. Lena Crane arrived at 14 Grover at 7 on a Monday, with a site folder under her arm and the specific quality of attention she brought to property she was about to move forward. The door was unlocked. The windows, she registered this without breaking stride, had been cleaned from the inside. Glass that clear takes time. She pushed the door open and stepped into the smell of fresh primer and sawdust, and underneath both something older, the particular settled weight of a kitchen that had cooked for people across many years. The man inside was on a ladder, running a level along the top of the east wall. He didn't turn when she entered. "Not open," he said. "I know. I'm here about the building." He came down the ladder with the unhurried efficiency of someone who finishes what he's doing before he addresses an interruption. Calvin Reeves. The calluses on his hands were the kind that came from actual work. He looked at her the way he looked at maintenance logs for the information, not the presentation. Lena gave her name, her company, the name of the development proposal. She watched his face as she spoke, and he gave her nothing readable in return, which she noted and filed. Then a voice came from the corner. "Who are you?" June had been sitting behind a folding table with a set of markers and a floor plan rendered in multiple colors. She was looking at Lena with the complete attention of someone who had decided this situation was worth investigating fully. "My dad's fixing this up," June said. "He's opening a restaurant." "I understand. Do you have a restaurant?" "No." "Then why are you here about the building?" Calvin said, "June," with the inflection of a parent who has registered the question, found it reasonable, and nonetheless needs it to stop. June returned to her drawing. Lena walked Calvin through the development proposal clearly, fully, without softening. The zoning reclassification, the filing timeline, the board's preliminary approval. His purchase, though legal, had occurred after the proposal was filed and did not constitute grounds for automatic exemption. When she finished, he said, "What month did you file?" "August." "I signed in October." "Correct. The contract predates the approval, not the filing. The filing establishes priority of intent under Section 41 of the Municipal Development Code." He looked at the folder under her arm, then at her. "Are you done?" From the corner, June slid a piece of paper across the folding table. The floor plan done in blue marker, kitchen on the left, dining in the center, a small square in the back marked "Storage" in uppercase. In the bottom corner, a figure with a round head holding what was clearly meant to be a spatula. Lena picked it up. She looked at it longer than she had planned to. She set it down gently. June had already started drawing something new. Lena left the way she came. In the car, she pulled Derek Holt's original site assessment from July and opened it to page 12. The kitchen infrastructure paragraph, good ventilation, updated gas lines, prep surfaces rated for commercial use. The paragraph had been highlighted in yellow. In the margin, in Derek's small angled handwriting demo, value low, acquire for land only. He had known the kitchen was worth keeping. He had planned to tear it down anyway. She put the folder on the passenger seat, did not start the engine for a moment. Then she moved her 9 o'clock and drove back to the office. The letter from the city's planning office arrived on a Thursday in a standard white envelope. Calvin read it at the kitchen counter while June ate cereal. Preliminary hearing in 6 weeks. He folded it along its original crease and put it in the drawer with the utility bills. 6 weeks. He sat at the table and looked at the window. He had signed the purchase contract without having anyone review it. He had read it himself carefully, he had believed. The zoning classification he'd verified had been current as of the prior year. The updated classification had been filed in September. 1 month before he signed. He had not known to look for an updated filing, but not knowing was not the real problem. The real problem was that he had not asked anyone to check for what he might have missed, because asking required admitting the possibility of a gap, and he had spent years training that admission out of himself. He was wrong. He drank his cold coffee and did not pour another cup. That night, after June was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table with a printed copy of the Municipal Development Code. He was not a lawyer. What he was looking for was the seam. He found it at 1140 Section 41, subsection C, paragraph 3. A property with an active commercial use established prior to the board's final vote required a 2/3 majority for displacement, not a simple majority. Active commercial use, established prior to the vote. He had 5 weeks and 4 days. The following Saturday, he brought June to the restaurant while he worked. She had her markers and her drawing pad. He was rolling a second coat on the east wall when the marker sound stopped. He turned around. June was asleep in the folding chair in the corner, her drawing pad open in her lap, more detailed than before, with measurements penciled in the margins in her precise printing. Calvin set the roller in the tray. He walked across the room and sat down on the floor beside her chair. Cold came through the old window frames and settled at floor level. He could feel it through the back of his jeans. He didn't move. He sat in the half-finished room that had cost everything he had saved, and he looked at his daughter asleep, and he stayed without moving for a long time. Not because he was tired, because standing up felt like something he had to earn back first. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks before the hearing, when Derek Holt's black SUV pulled up in front of 14 Grover Street. Calvin was running wire along the east wall when he heard the door. He turned. The man who walked in wore a coat that cost more than Calvin's truck payment and moved through the space the way people move through spaces they have already decided belong to them, assessing, not observing. Derek Holt was 52, well-kept, with the specific ease of a man who had never had to explain to anyone why he needed what he was reaching for. He looked around the room once, not the look of someone curious, the look of someone calculating square footage. "Mr. Reeves," he extended his hand. Calvin shook it. "I'll be direct. I'm prepared to pay you twice what you paid for this property. Cash closed 30 days. He set a business card on the prep counter. "You have a daughter. That's real money, more than you'll see from this place in 3 years, if it gets off the ground at all." Calvin looked at the card, didn't pick it up. "I know what my place is worth," he said. Derek nodded slowly, the nod of a man who had expected this and was not bothered by it. He walked toward the kitchen doorway, looked into the back room, came back. "The thing about properties like this," he said, "is that they attract people who fall in love with the idea of the restaurant, the idea of starting over." He paused. "The idea doesn't survive the first winter. You should go." Derek picked his card back up from the counter, held it a moment, then set it back down. "I'll leave this, in case the idea changes." He moved toward the door, then stopped, turned back halfway. "You know what the worst thing about buying property without proper legal review is, Mr. Reeves. It's not that you lose. It's that you were already losing before you signed. You just didn't know it yet." The door closed. Calvin stood in the empty kitchen. The wire he'd been running was still hanging from the bracket above the prep counter, half finished. He looked at it for a moment. Then he picked up the pliers and kept working. That night, after June was asleep, he went through the purchase file again, every page he had scanned and saved when he bought the property. He had looked at these documents a dozen times. This time, he was looking for something different. He found it on page 47, an email chain attached as a supplemental exhibit included in the seller's disclosure packet. A thread between the seller's agent and someone identified only by an external email domain that Calvin did not recognize at first. He searched the domain. It resolved to Holt Development Group LLC. The email was dated the 14th of September. 9 days before Calvin had made his first inquiry about the property. 18 days before he had made his offer. The message was 3 sentences. The sender Holt's office wrote that the property had been identified as a likely target for individual purchase ahead of the development window, and that any such buyer would almost certainly lack the resources to contest displacement proceedings through proper legal channels. The third sentence read, "Standard timeline should apply. No intervention necessary." Standard timeline. No intervention necessary. They had known he was coming before he arrived. They had watched him sign. Calvin set the laptop on the table. He did not close it. He sat with both hands flat on the table and looked at the screen at those 3 sentences, in a font that was smaller than it should have been, and the kitchen was very quiet. From somewhere down the hall, June shifted in her sleep. He closed the laptop. He went to the drawer and took out the yellow paper. He sat back down and started writing not a menu this time. A list of every number he had, every figure he knew, every clause he had found, in section 41. He wrote until 2 in the morning. When he finally stopped, the pad was 6 pages deep, and his handwriting had gotten smaller and faster toward the end, the way it did when his mind was moving faster than his hand could follow. He had one thing Derek Holt did not expect him to have: the email. And he had one thing the email confirmed. Derek Holt had never believed he would find the exact timestamp that proved the targeting had begun before the purchase, which meant the displacement proceedings had been initiated in bad faith against a buyer who had been set up to fail quietly. The question was whether a man with no attorney and 5 weeks could make that matter to a board that had been looking at Derek Holt's filings for 6 months. On the morning of the hearing, Calvin found Lena Crane's number in the building manager's directory. She was a tenant at Pearson Tower, the same building he serviced, which he had known for weeks and had not done anything about, because doing something about it would have required asking for help, and he had not been ready. He was not fully ready now. He called anyway. She answered on the second ring. He told her about the email. He read her the 3 sentences. He told her the date. She was quiet for long enough that he thought the call might have dropped. "Send it to me," she said. "I don't know if it changes anything legally. Send it to me." He sent it. She called back 40 minutes later and said she would be at the hearing. She did not explain what she was planning to do. He did not ask. There was a version of himself that would have asked, would have needed to know the full shape of the arrangement before agreeing to it. That version of himself had cost him things he was still counting. "Thank you," he said. She said, 6 o'clock, and hung up. The city council chamber smelled like fluorescent light and old upholstery. Calvin arrived at 6:45 with a manila folder and the legal pad. He wore the same jacket he wore to work. He had considered wearing something else. He decided against it. June sat in the back row with her drawing pad. She had her markers. She had agreed to stay quiet. Calvin trusted the first condition more than the second. Derek Holt arrived at 6:50 with 2 attorneys in matching dark suits who arranged their materials with the practiced efficiency of people paid to look prepared. Derek sat at the head of his team's table and surveyed the room the way he had surveyed the restaurant, taking inventory, not taking in. When his eyes reached Calvin, he gave a brief nod. Collegial. The nod of a man who has already accepted a specific outcome and is being gracious in advance. Lena came in at 6:58 and sat in the middle of the room, not at Derek's table, not in the public rows. Alone. She had a thin folder and her phone, and the expression she wore when she had already done the work and was waiting for the room to catch up. Calvin saw her. He looked at her for a moment, then looked back at his legal pad. When his name was called, he stood and walked to the podium and adjusted the microphone to his height without asking how. He opened the folder. He did not begin with context or history. He began with numbers, square footage, projected weekly covers, estimated monthly revenue based on comparable operations in similar corridors, and the specific clause in Section 41, requiring a 2/3 supermajority to displace an active commercial operation established prior to the final vote. His voice moved through the figures the same way he moved through a maintenance report. The information, not the performance of it. Halfway through, a board member leaned forward. "Mr. Reeves, do you have prior experience operating a food service establishment?" Calvin stopped. "No. I have 7 years of kitchen experience and 14 years as a contractor. The difference is that I take responsibility for everything I don't know how to do yet." He held the board member's eyes for one beat. Then he returned to the legal pad. When he finished, Derek Holt rose from his seat without waiting for the attorneys. He moved to the second podium with the unhurried ease of a man exercising a right. He did not address the board immediately. He addressed Calvin. "Mr. Reeves." His voice was even almost warm. "I want to acknowledge the effort here, genuinely. But I think everyone in this room understands that good intentions are not a substitute for experience. What you're proposing is admirable. But the development corridor on Grover Street represents a $40 million investment in this community's long-term infrastructure. I don't think it's unreasonable to ask whether a maintenance contractor with no restaurant experience is the right steward for a decision of that scale." Silence. Long enough to be a shape. Calvin did not respond immediately. He looked at his folder. Then he looked up at Derek across the distance between the two podiums. And when he spoke, his voice was the same flat, even register it had been in all evening. Not louder, not harder, just fully present. "You're right," Calvin said. "Good intentions are not a substitute for experience." He picked up the printed email from the back of his folder and held it up. "That's why I read Exhibit D in your supporting documents more carefully than you expected anyone to." The email dated September 14th. The one from your office to the seller's agent. The one where your team describes me by name. Before I had signed anything as a buyer, unlikely to have the resources to contest displacement through proper legal channels. He set it back down. "Standard timeline. No intervention necessary. That's the experience I'd like the board to consider." The room did not erupt. It went still in a different way, the stillness of a space where something irreversible has just been said, and everyone is waiting to see what shape it takes. Derek's late attorney leaned toward him and said something. Derek did not appear to hear it. His expression had not changed dramatically, but the survey quality was gone from it. He was no longer taking inventory. Lena Crane stood up. She walked to the podium without looking at Derek's table. She opened her folder and placed 3 printed pages side by side on the podium surface. "I'm submitting for the board's consideration the Community Impact Assessment commissioned by the city's own planning department and cited as supporting documentation in Mr. Holt's original filing." She cited page numbers. She cited the findings. The 11 businesses in that corridor generated more local economic activity per square foot than the proposed mixed-use development, according to numbers Derek's own attorneys had included in their submission, on the assumption that no one would read past the summary. She did not editorialize. She cited figures. She let the figures speak in the voice that figures speak in when they have been kept in the dark long enough. The board chair called a recess. When the session resumed 15 minutes later, the chair announced that the board required supplemental documentation from all parties before proceeding to vote. The final decision was postponed 60 days. Derek's lead attorney was already on his phone. Derek himself sat at the table with his hands folded and his jaw set, and said nothing. Calvin sat back down. His hands were flat on the legal pad. He looked at them, not the look of a man who had won, but the look of a man still measuring what he had just done and what it was going to require. From the back row, June watched him with the careful cataloging expression she wore when she was filing something away for later. The hallway outside the chamber was long and institutional. Calvin stood near the exit with June beside him, her drawing pad under her arm. "Are we okay?" she asked. "Not yet. But not tonight." She nodded. The nod she used when an explanation was incomplete, but Would do for now. They walked out together into the cold. The following Sunday came in gray. Calvin was up before 6. He stood at the kitchen window with his coffee and watched the street. He had held himself together through the hearing. He had held himself together through the drive home and June's questions and the moment she fell asleep against the car window. He had held himself together through the dishes and the work order filed before midnight, and the moment when he opened his laptop, looked at his bank balance, and closed it again without moving for 30 seconds. He had held himself together through all of it, the way he had learned to hold things, by staying in motion, by not sitting still, long enough for anything to catch him. He had held himself together for 2 years before that. He had held himself together through the week she left, through the calls to her parents, that went to voicemail through June, asking where Mama was, and Calvin finding the answer that was true and small enough for an 8-year-old at the same time. He had held himself together through the paperwork, and the one night he sat outside June's room in the hallway floor for an hour because he didn't know what else to do, and the hallway felt like the right place to be wrong in. He had held himself together through every Sunday morning after the yellow paper, the blank page, the drawer closing. He set his coffee down. He opened the drawer beside the stove. He took out the entire stack of yellow paper and set it on the counter. Uncapped the pen, clicked it once, just once, and looked at the blank top sheet. He started writing. Not the whole week. One meal. Friday night when the restaurant would open for the first time in 4 years. He wrote what he would cook, how he would set up the station, which prep he would do the night before, and which he would leave for the morning. His handwriting moved faster than it had in 2 years, not rushed, just moving the way it moves when you know what you're trying to say, and have stopped arguing with yourself about whether you should say it. He was 3/4 down the page when he became aware of June standing in the kitchen doorway. He hadn't heard her come out. She looked at the yellow paper on the counter. She looked at him. She didn't say anything. She went back to her room, quiet in the way that was completely unlike her, which meant it was deliberate. He kept writing. On the Friday of the soft opening, Bev from the laundromat came in first. She pulled out a chair at the table nearest the window, ordered whatever he recommended, and ate the chicken without saying much, which was, she later told Frank, the highest compliment she gave food she intended to keep eating. Frank arrived at 5:45. He stood inside the door without moving for a long moment, looking at the room. The walls were the same color. The light fixture above the pass was different, but threw light in the same direction, and standing under it felt the way it used to feel. He sat in the corner and ordered what he always used to order, which Calvin brought without being asked, because Frank had told June his usual order 3 weeks ago, and June had told Calvin, and neither of them had mentioned this to anyone. Lena came at 6. She stood in the doorway, no blazer, just her keys and a gray sweater, and looked at the room. The occupied tables, the light through the window, the sound of a kitchen doing what it was built to do. June saw her first. She crossed the room with the easy authority of someone who has already decided she has the right to be wherever she is going. She stopped in front of Lena, looked up at her. Then she reached out and took hold of Lena's sleeve, not her hand, just the fabric, just enough, and led her to the table by the window, the one with the best sightline to the kitchen, past the one no one had sat at all evening. She pulled out the chair. She looked up at Lena. "Sit here." Lena sat. Calvin came out of the kitchen a moment later, drying his hands on a cloth. He saw Lena at the table. He saw June already returning to her own seat, with the expression of someone who has completed a task she considered important and considers the matter settled. He pulled out the chair across from Lena and sat down. Not the posture of a man with a speech, prepared, just the posture of a man who had run out of reasons to keep standing at the edges of his own room. He didn't say, "Thank you." She didn't say it was nothing. On the prep counter in the kitchen, the dented aluminum spatula sat at the corner of the station, too small, too marked up clearly from a different chapter, doing exactly what it had always done. Lena's phone lit up on the table between them. A message from Derek Holt's lead attorney. She glanced at it, read it once, set the phone face down without responding. Holt Development Group was withdrawing the Grover Street proposal, effective immediately, no reason given. She did not tell Calvin. Not yet. There would be time for that. Right now the kitchen was still running. June was drawing something at her table with a navy marker, and the man across from her had just sat down for the first time in a room that had cost him everything and given him something back he did not yet have the words for. She left the phone face down. Outside on the sidewalk, Frank Osei stood with his hands in his coat pockets and looked in through the window at the light inside number 14 Grover. The kind of light that comes from a kitchen where someone is working and means to keep working. He had not seen it in this window in 4 years. He stood there until the cold settled into his coat. Then he turned and walked home, one hand lifting briefly at his side. Not quite a wave, not quite anything. Just a gesture toward the lit window and the ordinary night and the fact of a door that had not closed.